So the name of this course is Introduction to English Language Learners and Culturally Responsive Pedagogy. We've talked about culturally responsive pedagogy to an extent through the different cultural profiles that we've looked at, but this week we're going more in depth looking at what it means to use techniques that are culturally responsive in our teaching. So Gloria Billings is the researcher who is very known for culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive pedagogy. And this draws on an idea that we talked about in the assessment week, that all of our students bring different kinds of strengths to the classroom, and we need to capitalize on those strengths to encourage and help develop those strengths as a way to help students learn. So when we think about the students who are coming to our classes, more and more we have greater diversity, and we should look at this diversity as an asset for our classroom, not a deficit. These students bring different skills that our typical classroom of the past didn't have, and we should view these skills as an asset. We need to think carefully about how students from diverse backgrounds represent their culture, but they are also individuals, and so we can't stereotype from their cultures. The idea of culturally responsive pedagogy and teaching really developed first when looking at minorities in our classrooms, and over time that has come to include our immigrant populations as well. This all begins with really knowing our students. We need to identify students who are culturally and or linguistically diverse. So when we say that, students who may bring a different perspective to our classroom, a different kind of English or a different language altogether to our classroom. We need to know who these students are, and we're not going to really understand their backgrounds by typical teacher-student or teacher-parent interactions. We're not going to know about this from our neighborhoods or from parent-teacher conferences. We're going to have to do some homework to really research who these kids are and what their assets are that they bring to our classroom. The next step is to create a student or education biography. And you can see these questions here. Many of these questions are on your school district's home language survey, or the updated version in Missouri is language use survey. What language is spoken at home? What is the student's preferred language? They may have a different language than the home language, and it might even be English that is the preferred language. What is their previous experience with English? Have they studied it as a foreign language in a different country? Do they have no exposure at all? What is the English proficiency level of the student's parents? What is the student's previous education experiences? Have they been in school the whole time until they came to you? Were there times that they were out of school for whatever reason? And you can see these other questions that are important as well. getting to know the whole picture of the student helps you to know what their strengths are and how you can best engage them in class. It's very important that you build relationships with students' parents or caregivers. This can be done in a variety of ways. As you see on the slide, home visits can be effective. I know that's sometimes hard to do. Typically, our immigrant students' parents are very supportive of education, and they are very receptive to teachers reaching out to them, and they're very happy when teachers want to know more about their culture and expectations. So typically these interactions are very positive, and even if students are making poor choices for behavior, typically the parent will be supportive of you as an educator. I know that's not always the case, but typically with our immigrant students, these parents are supportive. Every student who speaks more than one language will either be screened or will have transfer scores coming from another school district when they enroll in the district. So typically this is done at the district level before they get to you at the classroom or shortly after they enroll. If you do not get your students' scores, ask your administration for them. And it could be on an off chance that the administration didn't know about this student and they need to be screened. That's happened occasionally for me. These scores give you a starting point at least of understanding where students are at. Are they just beginning? Are they close to exiting from an ESL program? Do note, students have to, by federal law, be placed in grade levels based on their age, not their English language proficiency. So, just because someone is a newcomer, that does not mean that we can place them in lower grade levels, even if they have missed out on multiple years of school. As you gather this information, as you build relationships with parents, as you begin to be aware of students' English proficiency skills, you can put a plan together that supports students' linguistic needs. We've mentioned some of the cultural profiles that some of our students may have experienced some trauma, so their psychological needs may need addressed. Social emotional needs, paying attention to whether students are participating in class. Are they engaging with kids on the playground or in extracurricular activities? Also, it's important to pay attention to students' academic needs. If they've had any time out of school, they may need to have some learning shored up that they didn't receive. After students earn the 4.7 on the WIDA access test, they can be exited from ESL services. But they are still by law continued to be monitored for 2 more years to make sure that they truly have the skills they need to be successful. I had a student this last year that had exited from ESL 2 years prior, and her classroom teacher said she is really still struggling. So we actually pulled her back into ESL and we will give her more supports. She'll take access again, and when she gets to the 4.7 and shows that she's successful in class, we can look at her being able to exit. Sometimes we see that students don't want to be the face or representative of their culture. And we'll talk about a few reasons why in a few minutes. Sometimes that's because the culture of the school doesn't make it safe or feel good to be proud of the culture they come from. There can be other reasons, but it's important that we work to help students feel comfortable with their school culture. And that part of the school culture is encouraging students to be able to represent who they are and where they've come from. Some ways that we can make students feel more proud of the culture they come from is to incorporate that into our actual curriculum. So if students are supposed to do research, they can research someone from their home culture if they wish. It's important that we raise culture above just holidays and food. These surface level ideas that are easily accepted as one-off interactions, but don't really teach us about the patterns and beliefs and products that develop in a culture over time. When students are able to integrate culture into the curriculum, we get past that surface into a deeper level. And when we make the physical space of school and classroom more welcoming to multicultural ideas, students can feel proud about their cultures as well. Here's some things we can practically do to incorporate culture. When you are writing worksheets or test items, incorporate students' cultures into the examples you use, or, for example, instead of using Anglo names like Billy and Hannah, use the names of your culturally and linguistically diverse students. If you have a Jose or a Muhammad or a Fatima, use those names in the worksheets that you create. Decorate your room with posters that reflect the students' home cultures. When students see other people who look like them being successful, they have a greater chance of being successful themselves. Learn a few words of the student's language and try to use it. When you put yourself in a position of trying to learn the language, you're valuing the student's language, and you're showing them that everyone who learns a language can struggle. You're putting the student in a position where they're an expert on something that you need their help with. And it values the language in a way that students who may be denying the value of their home language, it shows them that it is valuable. Address the elephants in the room. Religion is different in different cultures. So if you have a girl wearing a hijab, if you have a boy wearing the yarmulke because he's Jewish, talk about it. Make it safe to talk about those things. I skipped over learning to pronounce a student's name. It's so important the student's name is part of their identity, and it is important that you learn to pronounce their name as best as you can. Anytime when you're talking about students' culture, show respect and appreciation. Don't be afraid to ask questions and learn from your students. There are so many cultures around the world. There's no way for you to know about all of them, but your students are experts in the culture that they have experienced. So learn from them. And lastly, be careful to not overgeneralize. Not every Latino student is going to represent all Latino characteristics. And remember that we could have a Latino student from Mexico, we could have a Latino student from Costa Rica, from Peru, and they all have slightly different versions of Latino culture. In the same way, not every Iraqi student is going to be a devout Muslim. So learn their culture, but also, more importantly, learn the individual. All of these things together will help you to be successful in teaching culturally and linguistically diverse students.